This is the NAACLS Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the NAACLS Podcast. It's Monday, September 23rd. We are recording from the office in Rosemont, where there is currently a lot of construction, so I'm not sure if you will hear that in the background, but if in case you do, I apologize. This is the Reformed NAACLS Podcast. We did one about 3 or 4 years ago where it was quite long into tips about reviewing NAACLS programs, and we still wanted to focus on NAACLS review processes and methods for our volunteers out there, but maybe make them a little shorter and a little more digestible for everybody so you don't have to commit quite such an extended time for the product. Today's guest is Brenna Ildza. Brenna is the PARC Chair and has been for 3 years. She is just entering her 8th year on PARC. Brenna is also the Program Director at St. Luke's Health System. Since this podcast is about the self-study review process, and specifically about the summary page of the self-study review form, we decided to bring somebody in from PARC because they are in a unique situation where the self-study review and the self-study review response are the only documents they really work with. As you may know, for the most part, there are no site visits for PARC programs. So it's very important that PARC committee members be able to digest and understand the concerns that were listed on the self-study review itself. Likewise, since there's only one opportunity for phlebotomy and clinical assistant program directors to submit a response, it's important for them to understand and be able to digest the self-study review summary page. Since Brenna has a lot of experience for reviewing the self-study summary pages as the PARC Chair, but also as a program director, we thought she was the perfect person to come in and really give some tips about how to make sure that review page is as strong as possible. It's important to note that while some of the language in the examples may change because the nature of our documents and the fluidity of our standard compliance guide and our review forms, the basic practices and ways to approach these forms may not. That is to say, if you're a program director watching this, maybe to try to get some understanding about the review process, or if you're a reviewer itself, please make sure to go to the NAACLS website for the most up-to-date documents. As a program director and as a reviewer, you will be held accountable to the documents we have on our website or are presented by staff. And without any further ado, Brenna Ildza. Okay, Brenna, the main thing I want to talk about today is the self-study review page. So, especially the summary page at the end. I think it's something that experienced reviewers or maybe even new reviewers take a little bit of for granted because it seems like a very common item. But once you look at the NAACLS peer review process as a whole, you realize that the self-study review page, that back summary page, really sets the tone and lays the foundation for the rest of the process. Now, since you have been on the Program Approval Review Committee, or PARC, for 8 years and have served on chair for, I believe you're entering your 3rd year, can you just give us some of your experience about, A, working with these pages as a reviewer, B, the importance it plays when you are reviewing the program from a committee standpoint, and you're also a program director, so you can speak to those experiences as well.
I would be glad to. So first thing, as far as from the program director's perspective, and I guess the first thing I should say is that when I get the review back after it has been reviewed, that page is very important because that tells me where the concerns are and what I'm going to need to address. When you think of it from the reviewer's perspective, they've gone through all the materials that program director has submitted. The program reviewer is going to evaluate that program, but then their comments have to be summarized at the end, and it needs to be very clear and concise and accurate so that it'll be very easy for the committees that will review it further, have a clear picture of what needs to be responded to and what kind of information we're looking for. There is also the site visit report, and the site visitors, and they also are going to use this information. So it's really important that on the summary page that the information is accurate and it's very clear on what the concern is and what kind of documentation is needed.
Yeah, it's completely right. And it's something I know that since we worked together a lot on PARC, that we've stressed probably for the past 3 or 4 years is that when we mean clarity, we mean full sentences, going into detail about what items are missing and what standards they're going to, or what standards they apply to. So again, as you said, as this review advances forward from the self-study review to the program director to the site visitor and then back to the program director and then the committees and then from the committees to the quality assurance committee and then the quality assurance committee to the board of directors, there needs to be a level of clarity that once it gets passed through all of these hands and in front of these eyes, that it will make sense to all parties. Especially considering the weight and maybe the nerves that a review process has on a program director. So you and I kind of created, using experiences we had in the past, an example of an average self-study review summary page. The reason this podcast is focusing on the review page is that while there are other elements of the self-study review that are very important, which we can get to later on a different podcast, but it's important to remind reviewers that as a NAACLS staff member, when I have a program director that gets their review and they have questions and they're kind of really trying to determine how to process that, we always instruct them that we only hold them accountable to what is on the final page or the review page, the summary page we see here. So it's very important that all items that are marked no, that are concerns at this point, all those items are carried to the bottom, and that all those comments that are in the body of the review are reflected in this summary page. Along those lines, if there is positive reinforcement, which we definitely welcome, a lot of those comments should be just included in this additional comments area that people are seeing now, or if you're just listening to the podcast without the visuals associated, it's at the very bottom of the page, and there's a section clearly outlined as additional comments. We have to be careful as reviewers that we don't confuse the program directors with what they actually have to respond to. So taking a look at this summary page, what are some general items that strike you first and foremost, Brenna?
Well, the first comment I want to make is that it's really important for our reviewers to read the directions, whether they're a seasoned reviewer or a new reviewer, just to remind everyone exactly what the expectations are. And like it indicates under number 1, we want to list concerns and any missing documentation. Number 2 indicates that we want to make sure that if there are multiple concerns within a single standard, that we still want to list them separately so that it will be very easy for the program director to see what those concerns are. So the first thing that I noticed when I look at this self-study that's presented, and so we have 2 different standards that are listed there at the top that we can see right off. First, it has standard 1D2. The one thing I'm noticing here is that it doesn't list what the standard is. So it's not exactly clear what the concern or the issue is here. As we read through this, we will see that. The other thing that I noticed is that there are multiple things listed, or multiple clinical sites that are addressed under this one standard. And so technically these should probably be split out so that this is more clear. The other thing that I noticed right off, since I am a reviewer and a program director, is that the concern that is listed in 1D2. So standard 1D2 has to do with the sponsor ensuring that the activities assigned to students in the clinical setting are educational, and what is being addressed by the concern belong to this standard. So here is a concern that's listed underneath the wrong standard. that concern should actually be listed under 7C2 for the clinical liaison. And you'll notice that in this particular self-study, it is cited twice here, once under 1D2 and then again under 7C2. And, we're not going to list a concern in two separate areas. It should only be in one. I'm noticing at the bottom of the screen, we also have another 1D1 where it's unable to locate information, and that actually is good information, but once again, it's very helpful to have the standard listed so that we know exactly what is missing. So under E1, we are looking for the responsibilities of the sponsor, and so it should list that this is sponsorship responsibilities of the sponsor, and that's the information we're not able to locate. Under 1D2, like I said, these are the educational activities. I think just the takeaway here is that it actually has the standard information again, so we know what we're looking for. The one thing under 1D4, it's talking about they can't find or review the clinical affiliation agreements. That information is good, and I think that's appropriate. But once again, it would be helpful to have the standard information there. And then the second citing for 1D4, it's a specific point. And so the one thing I notice here is, as far as the assurance of completion for students, that is actually standard 1D, 4D. And so it would be helpful to have the complete citation and not just 1D4, because there are four sections underneath 4. There's A, B, C, and D.
So you and I went through this page and kind of separated out these standards to give examples of how somebody could improve this review language and really what we mean by making it clear to program directors and laying that solid foundation for the rest of the review.
That's correct. I think that's really important. It will make it better for the program director to respond. It will make it better for site visitors when they get to the sites. It will make it better for the committee when they get the response back and have to look at if the concerns were addressed and the missing information, and then allow us to create the minutes and the motion so that the board can evaluate the programs and decide if they should be, receive the award for their program and what the length will be.
As you stated during the overview, the first item really was put in the wrong place. And in addition to that, it was mentioned twice. So this image, for those of you watching the video portion of this, it was simply showing it doesn't belong there. So we're getting rid of all that language and addressing these items further along the review. Now, as you mentioned before, how some of the review language in the 1D1 items could be A, specified where we're listing the standard, and B, using the headings and the subheadings from the standards to really assist the program director so they know where they're looking if they want to review the standard and see where they were non-compliant. So when we're looking at 1D1, we're seeing that language really expanded upon. Brenna, as we compare the 1D1 to the newly evolved 1D1 AF, what are the big additions that we added here?
Okay, so the first thing that you'll notice on the improvement is that it indicates that standard 1 is sponsorship, D is responsibilities, 1 has to do with the responsibilities of the sponsor, and then it specifically lists out what A and F are so that we know what we need, what was the concern, what is missing. Okay, so that's the first one. Under 1D2, you'll notice that 1D2 now is located under 7C2A because 1D2 in the original, it indicates the facility fact sheet was not complete, and 1D2 it does not have anything to do with facility fact sheets. That's one thing actually I didn't mention previously, but we always want to cite from standards. We don't want to cite form. And in this case, telling us that the form is not complete doesn't really address what the concern would be. So in the improvement, you can see that item was moved to 7C2A. 7 is going to be program administration, C is faculty, 2 is the clinical liaison, and A is the qualifications. And now to have the information there and indicate that, that we are unable to determine if the clinical liaison, in this case it happens to be listed as Jane Doe, that whether or not she meets that standard, okay? And so this way now we have an opportunity for them to specifically know what we need information for. If we look at the second improvement, which was for 1D4, once again it says unable to review the clinical affiliation agreements. In this one, it's just going to list it out more specifically so that you know exactly what we're looking for. And in this particular case, they listed the specific clinical site in particular that the affiliation agreement was missing. And then the last one on here from the original, once again listed as 1D4. In the improved, it's 1D4D. So once again, you can see exactly what we're looking for. 1 is sponsorship, D is the responsibilities, 4 is the affiliation agreement, and then D for that is going to be the assurance of completion. So it's much more clear exactly what it is that we're looking for and which entities as well.
Yeah, and it's really that extra level of detail that is beneficial to a program director and beneficial to the reviewers moving forward. Like if you look at the first 1D4 in the original review, unable to review the clinical affiliation agreements. Well, were they there and you couldn't open them? Could you not find them? Were they not included? It may seem pedantic, but going to that extra level of detail really assists the program director to hone in on what they need to submit. It's helpful to remember that for accredited programs, the program directors, and I'm counting in my head, get 3 opportunities to respond to concerns. They have the self-study review response, they have the site visit, and the site visit review response. For approval programs, they really only have 1 opportunity. They have the self-study review response, period. So since we have limited numbers of chances to respond to programs, we really can't waste those opportunities or create confusion so program directors waste, by no fault of their own, those opportunities to demonstrate compliance. Let's move on to the next section where, as you see here, this is an example of where there were multiple items stuck in one concern, and again, in the interest of clarity, we're breaking them out, we're providing additional detail, and we're just really making sure that we are providing the program director with the specific information of the things they need to submit.
Yeah, I think the big difference in this particular example is it shows you that we're looking at 7C2, but in the improvement, it actually lists what the standard is. Notice that, once again, citing the form or listing the form as the concern, it's still in the improvement, but the difference is here, at least we know exactly which piece of the affiliate or the standard we're looking at for this particular concern. One other addition that I'm seeing here that I might do as an additional improvement on this particular example, we could actually put down that the standard for this one would actually be 7C2AI. So the additional information that we would have, 7 is program administration, C is faculty, 2 is going to be clinical liaison, A is qualifications, and then I happens to deal with the qualifications specifically of the clinical liaison and whether or not that person is a medical laboratory professional. It says, be a medical laboratory professional who demonstrates the ability to effectively coordinate clinical experiences of the student. So I'm thinking, too, kind of maybe of some alternate language so that we're not specifically addressing a fact sheet. And maybe it could be something like unable to determine whether the clinical liaison is a medical laboratory professional due to the incomplete documentation, and then maybe reference that the clinical facility fact sheet, is where you're going to find that information. But the thing that's really good about the improvement here is the program or the standard language is there, and also the fact that each facility that we need information from is listed out separately. So, we took one citation that had lots of information in it, or one rather concern. It's not a citation at this point, but a concern with lots of information, and we've now spread it out into individual concerns at different facilities for those clinical sites. Once again, I think the key takeaway here is that we're going to have more clarity for the person that's going to be following up on this, where it's going to start out to be the program reviewer. And then, like from there, site visitors, the committees, all the other eyes that are going to see it. So the clarity and the accuracy are going to improve. So as a reviewer, as you're preparing to start your review, something that's going to be really important is, you're going to have all the information from the program, but it's very important to have your documents that you're going to need at hand as you're going through. The standard documents that I always have available when I'm doing a review is the standards themselves. I always want to go back and make sure that what the standard says is what I'm looking for and what I'm going to list my concerns from. Next, I also have out the compliance guide. NAACLS compliance guide lists exactly what we're asking for, and sometimes there is flexibility in what can be provided, and so by having that available, it's going to make it so it's easier for me to determine if what was submitted is what was asked for and if that's what meets the standard. So I definitely have those two documents out with me always. Also having our review form. I work from the review form. As you mentioned previously, we have check boxes for each of the different standards and each of the different components that we're looking for. So it's really important that you have that document out. But we want to make sure that we don't ever cite or list concerns from the review form. We list concerns from the standards. So those are the three primary documents that I'm going to utilize during the review process itself. But I always do have these documents out and ready or open so that they are available as I'm going through, so I can determine if there are concerns or if those standards are being met.
Another way the standard compliance guide is very helpful is it provides an example of what we're really talking about when we say full sentences and the level of detail we're looking at we want to communicate to the program directors with. Those documents obviously were developed by many people over a long period of time, but it really serves as the voice of NAACLS. And since the reviewers take on that role as they're working with these documents, I just feel like it's a helpful reminder to maybe cross-reference a review that you've written just to make sure that those elements of detail and clarity are included in the review that a reviewer is working on. Okay.
One additional comment that I will make, I think it's really important for reviewers to realize that when the next person gets that review and the response, they're not going to have the opportunity to have looked at the self-study itself. And so, once again, like we've said several times, having it be clear and accurate at full sentences, those things are all very important because you don't have the additional self-study that you can go back and look at to see exactly what they meant by a comment. It needs to be clear.
So what we're looking at now is the improved self-study review. So as you see, the language that we went into a little bit more detail before is all present here. Another big difference between this self-study review versus the original one we looked at is everything is in numerical order. While that may seem like a small detail, it just helps as especially the process continues forward with the site visitor and the committee members, that this kind of logical numerical order just kind of assists as all these items are coming together.
Yeah, I would agree, Mark. Like I said, I think that this has much more clarity to it. There's less questions about what it is that we're missing. In this particular example, it does show how, like on any of the 7C2AIs, where it lists that they're unable to look or to determine whether this is a medical laboratory professional, and it lists that the fact sheet is where we get this information, but it doesn't, list the concern as the fact sheet, and I think that's really important.
So I think that's all we have for you today. I want to thank Brenna Ildza for joining us. If you have any questions about what you've seen here today, or how this may apply to separate standards and you need further maybe recommendations or guidance, always feel free to contact the NAACLS staff either through our website or our phone number, which is 773-714-8880. Thank you for listening to the NAACLS podcast. Please remember that the items of compliance discussed today may be out of date. For the most up-to-date documents, please visit NAACLS.org, click on the Program Directors link, scroll down, and look for the resource bar.